have some press for time.
Sometimes I'm recognizable because you told me. You start with
As long as you're not outside yet.
Okay. Does that make me sad?
I want to do it.
Okay. All right, are we ready? Now I walked in and made a spectacle of myself. Everybody good? All right, so our next presenter is Dylan Wells, and it's The Weight I Carry. Go ahead.
Hey everybody, thanks for being here. So my project is a documentary entitled The Weight I Carry. I've been working on it for a little over a year now. The idea came to fruition back in fall 2016, so it's been a while now. And before I tell you more about what the project is about, I just want to dive right into my story, because my documentary is a very personal piece, and I tell a lot about where I came from. So I transferred to Pacific in 2015 in the fall, and all of the red states that you see behind me, I've lived in. I'm from Florida originally. I lived in Ohio for about 12 years, and my family has lived in all the green states, and you also see the little ones over there. So these are all the places that I come from, and this is important because it ties into my story about relationships that I have with people. I think that when we move around a lot, like myself, one of the things that I've noticed is that relationships are very temporary, so this ties into how I communicate and how I sort of have started to act in society, and that's a very big overtone on my documentary that I hope comes out when you see it. And diving in a little bit more here, I want to tell you a little bit about before I came here, because I was already doing film stuff before I came to Pacific, but I really came here for the media arts program and the outdoor leadership program. I was at Kent State University. I was there for 2 years working on full feature-length films, working on short films, working on web series and graphic design. I was a digital media production major there. So I was already doing a lot of these things, but it was a very big school. There was so much people and so many projects, and I didn't feel like I could be as creative as I wanted to. So I got to transfer. And one of my wild cards was Pacific University. Because of the location, because of the media arts program, because of the outdoor leadership program, I really wanted to come here and try something new that I couldn't do in Ohio. But when I came here in 2015, I didn't know who to compare myself to. I didn't know how to work well with others. I was afraid of asking for help on projects. And a lot of my relationships began to falter from that. Come on in. And I was so interested in why. Why am I acting like this? And I started to look into myself and try to figure these things out, which I spent a lot of alone time doing. And like I said, I came here for the media arts department and the outdoor leadership program. I'm majoring in film and minoring in outdoor leadership. And these two things coupled together are why I chose to do a documentary about outdoor education and mental health. So some of my influences, I'm really excited about this. When I decided to come to Pacific, I knew that I wanted to study abroad in Japan, and that was something that kind of fueled me forward for the next year during those first 2 semesters that I came here. In my first semester, I was so involved in learning Japanese and thinking about the mountains and getting to go up to Mount Hood. I was all stoked about the outdoors, and I watched a ton of travel vlogs, a lot of snowboard videos, and this is where most of my style came from. And when I went abroad, I didn't take any film classes. I already knew that I would be doing that when I came back. I already had 2 years of film classes behind me. So I made a vlog called Enter Japan. And then while I was living in Japan for 4 months, traveling, finding myself, learning how to travel alone, learning how to journal and keep track of all of my thoughts, I made them into videos. And for those of you that have seen them, they're a little odd. They don't really have much of a linear trajectory. There's some substance there, but it wasn't really, it was me just having fun on my weekend trips, going to Mount Fuji, going to music festivals, having fun with friends, but there was definitely this little hint of introspection that if you look closely, you can see is coming from all of these classes that I was taking there and learning about all these social issues and political issues in the world. I took a class called Japan in the World and Design History in Japan, and learned about some of the things that were plaguing society in this island nation. one of those big things was the high rates of depression and suicide in Japan. They're almost double that in the US. And I've experienced depression myself, and I've been trying to figure out why and what makes it better, like how I can cope with these things. And I was so interested in that. When I went abroad, I didn't know that that would be something that I could actually physically see in the humans around me. But when I returned from Japan with all those videos, I came back and I realized that people didn't really notice, they didn't care, it didn't really make a lasting impact like I wanted to. So, to the drawing board for capstone. I wanted to talk about these two issues. Some of my other influences when I came back in 2016, I was taking documentary studies and practices, and I learned a lot more about some other big issues that maybe I could talk about. And 7 Ways from Sunday was a really interesting piece. It was kind of an experimental documentary, and I feel like that kind of comes out in my style too. This disjoint from the images and the story. But right now in my editing process, I'm gonna keep working through that. But 7 Ways from Sunday was a really cool piece because it was like a photo series of these stuffed animals, but the stories behind them were real stories of people experiencing racial injustice. And I thought that was such an amazing way to tell a story, so I latched onto that. And then of course, White Earth, about environmental issues in the oil industry and how it affects families and their children up in North Dakota. And 13th, if you haven't seen that, it's a really great documentary on Netflix about the prison industry and this industrial complex that we have. And then Waking Life, which isn't a documentary, but it's a really great sort of compilation of stories, and I think that shows in my documentary making style too, in that Richard Linklater, great director, if you've seen Slacker, you know what I'm talking about. If you've seen Waking Life, you're awesome, I love you. Because that movie is just like this guy dreaming and going through all these existential questions in life, and I feel like we all have those. But me telling my story, which I have this story to tell, I think kind of begs that question, like what is it to exist, and how do I be a human in society? And then of course the Pacific Northwest. Who all is from here? Anybody from the Pacific Northwest? So you know how beautiful it is here. Right in our backyard we have these amazing mountains, amazing forests, and I've been able to go there with friends that I've made since I've transferred here, and that's been really amazing. I've been taking outdoor leadership classes in the minor, and I've been able to be vulnerable in these spaces in the outdoors, and that's really what we preach in that program, is just being able to go in these spaces and talk about ourselves and pick apart what's wrong. And I've loved that so much. So with the Pacific Northwest as my focus, because it's where I'm going on all these trips, I dove into my research. And I wanted the outdoor education piece to really come to the forefront of this documentary, because that's what my life has been about for these past 2.5 years, being in the outdoors and being with people and figuring out what causes my mental fluctuations and how I'm feeling, how I'm happy, how I'm depressed. And N.A. Weisberg, one of my professors in junior seminar, gave me this great book to borrow, which I still have, called Last Child in the Woods. You probably didn't know I still have that, huh? I've been picking through this book over the past year, and it's really helped me to solidify some of the thoughts that I already had about my own mental health and what some of the effects of being in the outdoors or lack of being in the outdoors have been on my own life. We've seen that in society when children grow up and they are spending a lot of time in front of screens and not going outside and interacting with people, that they actually do worse in a lot of everyday life, and we get worse at problem solving, we get worse in social groups. And I was like, whoa, I'm seeing these in my own self. And I'm looking in the mirror and I'm realizing like, well, I'm experiencing these things. And on that bottom note, that really ties into this modern day depression, and Jennifer kind of framed that for me. One of my other professors, Jennifer Hardecker, kind of framed that for me when she saw my documentary process. She was like, you're talking about depression here, and I'm talking about my own depression, but she's like, we're really talking about this modern day depression. And I saw it in Japan, I saw it in my daily life, I see it everywhere on campus. We're spending a lot of time in front of our screens, on our phones, on our TVs for decades now on our computers, and that's really affected how I've started to research this issue, technology today. And that ties into my understanding of mental health and depression, and outdoor education, like I said, has really helped me to distance myself from this time that I spend in my room on editing. I spend so much time editing and doing graphic design really by myself that now I'm like, okay, I can go outside on these great trips with these people that are also really amazing and get to learn about them. Some of them are here today, and they've helped me to really figure out myself. So why? Why again, back to this question, what were some of these root causes? I was lacking these relationships in my everyday life because I didn't come from here, and I've always struggled with latching on to people because all my relationships have felt so temporary. That human interaction and that proper form of communication, in the minor I've learned more about leading and communicating effectively with circular communication. And that just means that bringing energy to a communication, to a conversation rather, versus how I like to communicate, and how probably most of us like to communicate more linearly, where you just have a focus and you follow it and don't really add to the conversation, because that's where my logic brain goes. I'm not too great at sitting in a circle of people just adding to the conversation. But through outdoor leadership and through some of the trips that I've been on, I've really been able to dive into these conversations and bring life to them, stoke the flame. So the process. I'm just going to take a quick drink here. You're fine. Making a documentary can be a lot of things. For me, it started with my beat sheet up here. This is where, in the pre-production process, I had to start solidifying my ideas. In junior seminar, we'd come in, and I felt super prepared just with the idea that I was going to make this documentary about outdoor education and a little bit about depression, maybe a little bit about mental health. But as I started to write more and come up with a synopsis, I wasn't really sure where it was going to go. And that's one of the beautiful things about documentaries, that you never know where it's going to go until you start making it. So we've got this environment, the Pacific Northwest, and I can't stress enough how amazing it's been to be here in this new environment, because when I came from Ohio, everything was flat. There was no mountains. I had to go all the way up to Vermont to go see mountains, and even those, like Kings Mountain outside of town here, is about the size of the average one over there. So being near Mount Hood and being able to go on all these great trips, which I'll actually mention some later on, has been amazing to be able to have this as my environment. But the important thing here is the relationships and the change that we're going to be looking at over the course of the documentary. So in documentary studies and practices, we talk about making this beat sheet, and it started off looking at children and maybe how their relationships might be affected by staying in nature more, and then college students, and then even adults. And I wanted to look at these 3 age groups, and then I realized that's way too much. That's way too much, way too much. I went and tried to volunteer teach at a middle school around here, and I went there 3 days and immediately was like, I gotta bring this closer to home. There's no way, like I can't be riding my bike to this middle school to go teach kids how to turn on stoves in the outdoors and hope that I can go film with one of them. That was just, it was huge, it was a huge idea. So really narrowing that focus down to myself and maybe 1 or 2 subjects in my own age group. That's what I wanted to focus on, because I've got Outdoor Pursuits as this wonderful resource to go be with people. So why not use that to actually film? And I wanted to begin to understand some of the feelings expressed when talking about nature and being in nature, and how people can change simply by going outdoors. Seeing the world through my subject's eyes and my own eyes, that's where my vlogging style kind of comes in there, just having the camera show space very, very raw. That was where the style kind of started. And is there change? What is that change? Where is this change happening? What is the subject? What is the world reviewing? What is the relationship with nature here? these are all the things that I like really had to write out to figure out what that focus was going to be. So production. This is a really fun part. I spent maybe about a month overall in principal production, just from the time that I went on my first trip to my last trip over the course of about a year. So where were these trips? All these snapshots you see behind me are places that I've been in the past year, ranging from the San Juan Islands up in Washington, all the way down to Chiapas, Mexico. And I've been so fortunate to be able to go on these trips because, like I said, not being from around here, I never would have thought growing up that I'd be able to go to all these places. So on the top left, there's some fun friends hanging out in hammocks up in the San Juan Islands. That trip is in my documentary as one of the places that I found a really good friend and was able to talk about feelings with them. And I'll talk about him later. I've also got some footage from Mount Jefferson from a good friend of mine. I've got interviews from the San Juan Islands. That's where I interviewed three of my subjects, actually. And even some local places in our backyard here. I don't know if any of you have been over to Sylvia Lane. It's where we do, Stimson Lumber owns that land, and we actually do some training hikes up the gravel roads they've got up there, and it looks out over Hag Lake, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. And I remember back in September, we hiked up there to train for our South Sister summit attempt, and the fires had smoked out the sky, and the sun was setting, and you could smell it in the air, but there was just this burning red sunset that I just fell in love with, this sunset over the mountains there. And that's really where, in production, I was like, I know what I know what visually I want to focus on. I've got campus B-roll. I've got footage from our South Sister Summit attempt back in October, which was really fun. And I've got stuff from the coast as well. So really you'll see all that the Pacific Northwest has to offer, as well as down to Mexico. So finally, my subjects in post-production. This is where I've really been trying to get my story out. One of the problems that I've had is just like rehashing this first half of the documentary where I talk about myself, and getting that off my chest has been one of the things that I've really been able to do with this platform. Because it's hard to talk about things like depression and suicide. These are things that I go like pretty raw into in my story. And then finding that focus and shifting it over to my subjects, how do they even tie into this? What am I talking about here? Jason Nguyen on the left and Ariel Watanabe, who's in the crowd today, are two of the positive lights in my life. They've just been really great people in helping me to talk about things, talk about these vulnerabilities, and share my story, and then share some of their story too from the trips that we've been on together. So I'm going to show you a little 2-minute clip. This is kind of just a sneak preview of what my story talks about. It's kind of some of the things that I've already talked about in the presentation, but you'll see some of this style here.
I live in a fast-paced society where I can spend more than 30 to 40 hours a week looking at screens. I do a lot of video work, graphic design, readings, and schoolwork on my computer and on my phone. Along with this, I spend countless hours a week on social media and on the internet. In 2015, I moved to Oregon for college. At the time, I was really excited, but also overwhelmed by all the new opportunities that were being presented to me pretty much every day. Back home, I knew my friends and my family were making transformations too, but I would no longer be a part of this, and this was something new I would have to figure out all over again. Throughout my life, I've relocated a few times, starting in Florida, moving around, then up to Ohio, where I actually stayed for about 12 years. But I was bounced back and forth, and I made new friends every few years. So to me, all the people in my life felt temporary. This, as a kid, made me feel like I lacked control over a lot of things. When I first moved to Ohio, I had to leave behind my roots. And when I was young, this was a massive change, so naturally, I was sad a lot. But I had to hide it.
So you'll see some of the things in there that I've been working on, music and stuff. That's one of them. But in the future, I'm living in the area. I'm going to be finishing up my project here for graduation in a month. And I'm really excited. Everybody, that I've been able to use this platform to speak about things like depression and suicide and showcase Pacific Northwest for what I've found it to be, one of these great places for therapy. And really talk about what that means and open the floor up for this conversation for really anybody to step in and relate to these problems that I've been having. I've been pursuing jobs, I've been applying, I'm submitting some animations to Bend Film Festival. I might submit this project to Bend Film Festival, and that's pretty much it. I'm super pumped for the future. Come see the film, come see all the films. That's it.
We've got about 3 minutes for questions.
Sure.
So, because I'm also in your senior capstone class, you didn't touch on it in this version of the presentation, but I thought it was really beautiful, the idea of hiking through the depression. So if you could elaborate on that for everyone else, because it's
Yeah,
beautiful.
so the title of my film is The Weight I Carry, and that came from backpacking, obviously. Like, I'm hiking through the depression in these trips that we go on, and that was something that I mentioned in one of my earlier drafts, was like, really unpacking that was like a thought that I had, like unpacking my pack in the backcountry and then like being vulnerable with people and talking about the things that I'm unpacking in my brain, like all of that kind of influenced the title, The Weight I Carry. I just thought that was like a pretty obvious dichotomy there, and I thought it was pretty interesting. Any other questions?
Do you have any problems in production when filming outside? I know that can be like audio issues and lighting.
Yeah, good question. So first, obviously, I had to secure the equipment from the media arts department. Thank you again for letting me take some of this equipment outdoors. When I went to the San Juan Islands, I just brought a microphone in a Pelican case, and I had it strapped to the front of my sea kayak. And that was my primary, actually, as well as my own action camera with a waterproof housing. Those were my two primary pieces of equipment on that trip. But then on some of the bigger trips where I needed a camera, taking like that extra weight of the Canon 5D or the Canon 60D and a lens and batteries and some audio, like that packs on pounds. And that was probably one of the biggest struggles. And really also the pre-production, going out and figuring out what I wanted to film kind of in the moment and just knowing that I would have to bring it back and distill it. But with the experiences from making a vlog, I got so much better at going out and not coming back with 17 hours of footage from like a weekend trip. And that's one of the things I'm really grateful for. Just being able to practice that while I was abroad and being able to practice that a lot here in the documentary class and the narrative classes, knowing not to go out and not have a focus was huge, but that was definitely something I've dealt with.
So making a personal documentary that kind of centered yourself as a subject and also meeting others like surrounding. What were some challenges that you had to face like during the filmmaking process, and like how did you decide to like structure it and things of that nature?
So how did I decide to structure it? Is what you're asking?
Yeah, because like it could be awkward being a filmmaker
When looking at myself.
and being on both sides of the camera?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I struggled with the whole time through this production was like, first off, making the decision to even make it about myself was a huge thing that I'm not struggling with it now, but up through production, I was like, how am I gonna tell this story? It's gonna have to be about me. And that was just something that, since I've filmed so many vlogs and like I've started to turn the camera on myself more, I got more comfortable with. And then, yeah, I mean, now continuing to do post, it's getting it all out and showing it to people was like the most important thing, so that I can get feedback and hear, oh, you don't need to tell all of that, show us more. Because right now in my documentary, it's just like, blah, 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 like for like 10 minutes straight, it's just me telling my story. Because you gotta pack it all into that little bite-sized piece. So now going back, I can structure it with less of that. I just have to get it all out first. And that's really, I think, if you're making a personal documentary, that's what you have to do, is just get it all out. And then show it to some friends, show it to your professors, and let them tell you what you don't need. And that's really helpful. That's it?
Yeah.